Hello and welcome to the Catholic Intellectual. I'm your host, Alexander Chunda. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. This week I have on a very good friend of mine, Mr. Zach Larson. And we're going to be talking about how to live out your faith as a Catholic young professional, which I think he is a stellar example of. So we'll get into it. Maybe to start out, you can tell a little bit about yourself, and then we can kind of go through your life history up to this point of becoming a young professional out there in the working world and trying to live out your faith in the working world. So,
all right. Well, life history, we'll get to that in a sec. But before then, I'm Zach. I work at school vendor. We work with software for special education students. I love working there. I love being able to support teachers as they work with their students. And I have been in the workforce for the past 2 years. I graduated from the University of Texas at Austin in 2019 with a degree in English literature and American studies. And so now I have translated that over into a career in sales as well as consulting. And I find that really energizes me and motivates me, helping to find people who need a problem fixed, something that they can need help with getting more efficiency. So that's a little bit about what I do.
Mm-hmm. So to give some context to our conversation about how to live out your faith as a young professional, how to live out your faith in the working world, maybe we can start first with how you became a man of faith in the first place.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I won't get into too much detail. I'll just sort through maybe 3 milestones that I can summarize it in. Growing up, my dad always made sure that we went to Mass on Sunday when I was a little kid. And we would spend time there before praying, spending time. My dad would teach me kind of how to pray, how to talk to Jesus, how to look at the crucifix and think about the life of Jesus. And one memory in particular stands out to me that I really like. I think that summarizes this period of my life. It was after we had received communion, and I had asked my dad, what should I do now that I've received communion? And my dad invited me to contemplate Christ's life, to think about how Christ had come to earth as God to be man, and how he wants to reach out to each of us individually and to especially call out to us during the Mass. And so I thought that was a really beautiful image that stuck with me since then. And then when I was in middle school, my parents sent me to Catholic school, both for the rigorous academic life there, but also for the spiritual life. And I had this Dominican sister that was my church history and morality teacher. And I just remember for the first time I had understood the church's history to be a holy history, a history that was God inviting each one of us to participate in his divine life, to participate in building his kingdom here on earth and supporting other people who need that message of love and of God's fatherhood. And then also understanding, the why behind the what in morality, I think was really exciting to me. So I also marked that as a big milestone for me, where I saw I could personally act and live in a way such that it pleased God, and in a way that such I can make an impact in building his kingdom. And then fast forward to senior year of high school. High school happens to everybody. So I had some struggles in my faith at that time, and I got the opportunity to go to the Seek conference put on by Focus in Nashville in 2015. And while I was there, I had a very beautiful encounter with Christ in the Eucharist that I found just to be incredibly healing. I felt God's mercy really tangibly, and that he was, again, reaching out to me in my life and was calling me to walk with him. And I had no idea what that looked like, and I'm sure you'll ask me a little bit more about that in the future. But from that moment on, I would say I considered myself a man of faith.
Very good. So I think one thing that a lot of people struggle with who have a vocation that involves going out and getting, I guess, what we would think of as a normal job, and who really love their faith, that care about their faith, is that transition from university life to the professional world. So you can talk about how you saw work maybe as a university student in your faith, and then maybe talk a little bit about how that changed, or if it changed, going into the professional world.
Yeah, that's a great question. in university at UT, I had the chance to get connected with a really special group of guys called Shenstein University Men. I was invited by my now good friend Austin Darrow to check out this, what I know now is a movement, but at the time I just thought it was a group of guys at UT just hanging out and going out to this chapel in Austin, where they have this picture of the Blessed Mother. And I remember the first time going to that shrine, just being really on fire for that sense of mission and really rediscovering that sense of mission that I had felt back in middle school when I was learning about the history of the church. I think in Schoenstatt, the Blessed Mother showed me like how to really encounter Jesus deeply, but also to make my mission the church's mission. And I don't want to get too much into that. That's another story. But I think I was able through that to offer up a lot of my studies to Christ through the hands of his mother. I really came to believe that she could take those sacrifices and make them even more of a perfect offering to God. Even though maybe my sacrifices were imperfect, maybe I was only doing my work at the time during the day to get a good grade, or to maybe just for the attention, or maybe just for the right to say like, oh, I'm good at school. But I would offer that up to the Blessed Mother, and I realized as I was doing that throughout college, she helped me find the better intention behind it. She helped me find a way to really offer it up to God and to start to offer my best work to God as well. And so I found that was incredibly helpful in my work in university. I also had the chance to participate in some pretty awesome apostolates that were hosted by Schoenstatt University Men. One of those is the Good Friday pilgrimage, and I helped lead that 2 years. And I remember just being in awe at how many people were thirsting for an uplifting message of life and love, and also the proclamation of the fact that Christ died for us on the cross. Good Friday pilgrimage in Austin has like 500 to 700 people now, and I got to help lead that during two of the largest ones that have ever happened here in Austin. And to just see people really encountering Christ in that way just gave me a lot of fulfillment and a lot of drive to try to continue to do something like that after I had graduated. So that's kind of my college experience.
Yeah. So that's kind of interesting, right? Because I think a lot of people, at least in what I've seen, they have this experience in their university lives where it feels like their work has this very direct sense of mission, right? Because doing something like leading a Good Friday pilgrimage very clearly, I think, is like, this is about Christ. This is about bringing people to Christ. And I think it can often be difficult for people that they want to live with this sense of mission, and then they go get kind of like a 9-to-5 job, and it doesn't feel like it necessarily has that. So I'm wondering if that's something you experienced, and maybe how you deal with that.
Yeah, I think that the funny thing about college is that it's really exciting because everything that it's supposed to get you is in the future. So it's, even if you're having to sit down and take a test or study a subject that you really don't like, or read a book you really don't like, in my case, at least at the end of the tunnel, you have this idea that, well, I have this big goal of graduating and getting a college degree and then going out into the world. And then once you start to get into professional life, those goals start to become a reality. Those dreams that you've been having start to become actions that you can act upon, and different open doors that you can take. And so that can be a little bit overwhelming, I think, especially after you're first graduating from college, because there are a lot of jobs out there, and the job market, of course, is difficult, but there are a lot of jobs out there that are very good, especially for people who do have a degree. And so I think that maybe for me, it's a question of remembering that, it's working towards something. I have to remember that my job is meant to help me grow in character. It's meant to also help the people that I work with, people that I serve. And that may not be as flashy or as exciting as maybe being in college when you're just just going hard all the time, studying up all night until 3 a.m. You don't really do that anymore in the professional life, but what you do get to do is see real impact on people's lives, especially if you get the chance to be in customer service, which I was in before I started my current job. You really get to see just how much taking the time to spend time with people has an impact on their life and can actually kind of provide them with a nice experience. And that to me is kind of my day-to-day motivation.
Yeah. It reminds me of something I saw recently from St. Jose Escriva. Opus Dei is a big emphasis in their spirituality on like sanctifying work. And so there's this quote, and he's talking about how one day, like the act of peeling a potato, something very mundane, can be something that doesn't really mean anything. But when combined with the faith, when done out of a desire to love and to sanctify yourself, can completely transform something mundane like peeling a potato into something sanctifying. Or I also think along with that, like Saint Therese of Lisieux and the Little Way, the idea of doing like small things with great love.
Yeah.
And then offering you like everything that you do, all the work that you do as an act of love to God and to our fellow humanity can really transform the way we look at work.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's something really beautiful in that idea of the little way, right? Because I think so often it's so easy to think that all these saints just did all these great things, but they're not saints because they did a bunch of great things. They're saints because they were great people and they were great. They took great spiritual actions. And so for some people, maybe the call is to be this missionary who goes to different countries, or this missionary who goes to the inner city and works really hard to work on that. Other people are just called to their 9 to 5. And in that, there is a little way to sanctity. There is God calling to us in those small and tiny opportunities that can really present themselves and can really be fulfilling. I have conversations with clients, for example, and they work all day and they just are, especially during the COVID pandemic, just like so tired, and there's so much going on in their lives, and it's such a refreshing thing to be able to meet them and to try to make my experience when I'm training them in our software, or when I'm reaching out to them on the phone even, to make that an enjoyable experience. That becomes a lot of what I focus on, and having those little details. And then of course offering that up to God after the fact, before the fact, just making it something that's truly and deeply meaningful for the spiritual life.
Yeah. It makes me think also of something I think is very common to see in today's world. And I just saw like an example of just scrolling through social media today, which is kind of just like joking about like how awful work is. Like it kind of jokes like every weekend we should have a 3-day weekend because I need more than just 2 days to psych myself up for 5 weeks of suffering. And it just sort of like I get it's sort of like joking, but it seems like a lot of people take this approach to life that they're just sort of like mundanely suffering through their work, that like they hate it, and it honestly seems really miserable. And it just makes me think, right, like we have something that we can do living out our faith and work that gives it meaning, that gives it purpose, and helps us to find joy in our day-to-day life. And so we don't have to live kind of almost what seems like just waiting for death finally, right?
I think that's a common problem that people across the board run into, and I think you're right that our faith in Christ is the answer to it, because we do have this faith that we're called to help build the kingdom of God with what we do and how we spend our day, and we're also called to respond to God's will in our lives and what He's specifically saying to us in our originality. I think a lot of times when the temptation comes to think about work as that is just like it's just a task I gotta get through. A lot of times it can come from wishing that I had someone else's life, right? A lot of times it can come from me thinking, well, if I had this other person's role somewhere else, like it would be so exciting. And I don't find that to be necessarily true. I think that God is giving us what we have in front of us for a reason, right? And He's also continually inviting us to dream even further for what could be. It's so easy to think when we're in college that's the time for dreams, that's the time for thinking big and thinking about what my life could be. And then when we get to the professional life, well, like all that stuff was for college, right? Like all that stuff was for when I could go eat on campus and I was living in the dorms and life was maybe a little bit more like exciting in that sense. But now like life is not boring, but it's stable, it's peaceful. And there's something about that stability and peace that I think people forget to appreciate a lot. You having a routine, that's the same for, any number of days, setting one of those routines for yourself, if you set your own schedule, that actually can provide a lot of platform for dreaming big, and then like putting strategies into place to make those dreams a reality.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I find that sometimes if people are struggling with that idea that I'm stuck in my 9 to 5, they haven't articulated yet what they actually want. They haven't maybe articulated to themselves, like, where do I want to be in 2 years or 5 years? And how can where I am right now lead me there? How can I grow where I am right now and contribute where I am right now?
Mm-hmm. We can talk a little bit about that dreaming, because I think, most people when they're a child, they just naturally dream about things. And they dream about like big, crazy things, lots of things that are probably never going to happen. Mm-hmm. And I think that sort of like the realities of life can kill that in people sometimes, because they lose maybe belief in themselves and what they're capable of. And one of the things that I found really helpful for my own life is I felt like I was able to go from this place of dreaming about really like abstract, far off things to dreaming about kind of like immediate things in my day-to-day life that I can actually accomplish.
Yeah.
And there's something terrifying about that, right? Because some things that you can actually do in your day-to-day life, like you can actually fail at.
Yeah. And
then there's the action, like, if I fail at the things I'm dreaming at, doesn't that just kill like the whole like idea of dreaming in general? I think like it takes a lot of courage to dream about things that you can actually do, and a lot of people, I think, like they lose the courage to do that, or maybe they lack the encouragement or the vision to be able to dream in their day-to-day lives, and that kind of
for sure
can kill kind of something that brings a lot of joy to work.
I think so. I think that maybe the best way to combat that is by this idea that I always like to think about in my own life, which is taking a leap of faith. Taking a leap from one side of the canyon to the other, not knowing how we're going to make it, but trusting that God will be there with us, and trusting that God wants us to take that leap of faith into something exciting. So I think that you're absolutely right. When we're in college, we're dreaming so many years out, and the reality of the professional life and maybe even the family life just seems so far away that it's almost easier to dream about it then, because you know that you don't really have to do anything per se to lead to that until X date in the future. But I would encourage a lot of the listeners, especially if you are in university right now, to start dreaming big about where you do want to be, and start thinking about how, by cultivating a love for prayer, by cultivating a love for mission and a desire to serve, that you can have more clear in your mind what you want to be doing. Because I think that a lot of times in the professional life, especially, the temptation will become to just react to the situations around you. It'll be, like, oh, I heard about this particular situation or job, like, I'm just going to, go for it, right? And that's perfect for when you have just graduated, when you're still looking for things in your life. But as you're narrowing it down, like, you want to really get a better idea through experience where your life wants to go and where you want to contribute in your life. And for a lot of people, the beautiful thing is, going to your job and getting paid so you can support your family. But for guys like me, I'm not at that point yet in my life, and I have to find, okay, how in my job can I, on the one hand, contribute to a mission that I agree with and that I think is really helpful for people, but on the other hand, be learning at the same time, like, what ultimately, like, I want my impact to be. So I would say take the small opportunities in front of you that seem like the dreams that you have, and act on them, and to not be afraid, right? To not be afraid to dream concretely 6 months out with what you want to be doing with your time in work or outside of work.
Yeah. I think one of the other things that can make this difficult is, you talked about the idea of originality. There's a great temptation to want to compare ourselves to what other people are accomplishing,
for sure,
and not to instead compare ourselves with who God desires us to be in our originality. That each one of us is unique with our own gifts and talents, is our own unique part of the body of Christ. And learning to really value that and love the part of the body that we are, and then to do that to the best of our ability. And so you learn, I think, to dream with that transforms the idea of dream, that you're not dreaming someone else's dreams, you can dream your own dreams, and then actually dream dreams that are possible for you to accomplish.
Yeah, I think that's that's really important, is just understanding who you are temperamentally, understanding the unique gifts that God has given you, and how you can act on those gifts for a meaningful contribution. It's going to make that discernment process really exciting if you can turn it in those terms and frame it in that way. Because then you're thinking, well, what would really work for me, right? Like, what would really work for who I am, taking an honest look at what my strengths are, maybe what some of my shortcomings are, and how can I apply those to something that contributes to society, and not necessarily, as you said, like envying someone else's position or someone else's gifts or someone else's temperament, right? Like, gotta recognize that our own temperament is valuable, and that it's God trying to tell us something. It's God trying to tell us, you will be happy if you seek out this type of role as opposed to the other.
Yeah.
And a lot of that discernment comes through experience. I would say about 50% of it, and I would say the other 50% comes through reflection, discernment, prayer, quiet time, which I think, and maybe we can talk about this next, but that can be one of the hardest things to find in the professional life, is time for God. And it can be hard to find because we have this 9-to-5 schedule that we follow every day, and it's easy to get kind of in the loop of that and just continuing through stuff, and then my social life's after that and whatnot. But there is an imperative to be really intentional with your life once you reach this point, because you only have so much time of the day that's not working, and that is, leisure, recreation time, and it's important how you spend it.
Yeah. So maybe we can talk about that next. How did you go about trying to build a strong prayer life once you became a working professional?
Absolutely. It's a very good question. I'll start by saying that in college, it's a little bit not easier, but there's just more apparent opportunities for prayer life throughout your day. Most college campuses have a Catholic church right next to it or within the campus, and you can go there and visit Christ in the Eucharist whenever. I would really encourage you guys to do that if you are a college student listening, because when you get to the point where you're working, you have to be super intentional about how you spend your time, which is to my earlier point. But for me, it's blocking out time, really. And I know that might sound boring to some of my free spirits out there who are listening. I'm just like you, don't worry. I like when I can just flow through life, and when I can, spontaneously pop into the chapel or spontaneously go to a daily mass. But if you really want those things in your life when you're in the stage of life that I'm in, you have to really make plans and strategies on how to get there. And that is just, for me at least, it was like a hard pill to swallow. Like, I wanted my life to continue to just be spontaneous all the time. But if you can make that time to really safeguard your spiritual life. So like, the first 10 minutes when I wake up, I pray to Christ and the Blessed Mother, offer up my day and give praise. And then before I go to bed, I relate the things that happened in my day and ask them to show me, like where I could have done better, and offer the things that I thought I did well. And those safeguards are super important, because from that can flow maybe the spontaneity that some of you guys might be looking for. From that can flow maybe an attachment to, well, just today I have some extra time, so I'm going to go visit the nearby parish and go pray there for a while. I would say safeguards are so important. Put them in your schedule, please.
Yeah. So you talk about, of course, like how helpful it is when you're in college and you can just walk most times over to your church and pray there. And that's much more difficult once you get to the professional life. And I think a common difficulty also is community. Because community, of course, is essential to living out the life of faith. And I think a lot of people really struggle with that in the professional life, because at least I know the way it was for us at UT is you can always be at the Catholic Center, find someone to hang out with. And it can be, I think, shocking for people when you don't have that anymore and you go out into the working world.
I think that's a good point to bring up. I certainly found that when I came to UT, there was tons of people who, if I just showed up at the church, there'd be people who were like, how you doing? Check out this group. Check out this retreat. Like John 15, Awakening Retreat, Welcome Retreat, Focus, SUM. There's so many groups just like reaching out and pursuing me really intentionally. And it feels awesome, like when you're in that situation, because it feels exciting to be pursued by these different groups and to be invited into these beautiful ministries. So you almost expect the same thing when you graduate. You expect, well, there's going to be someone, pursuing me, maybe, right? And so if you're in college, definitely like focus in on like pursuing other people and like work on that now if you get the chance, because you're going to have to do that when you're in professional life. You're going to have to show up at the parish and try to find the young adult group, because maybe it's not going to be super apparent. You might be lucky enough to get invited to a group, but like seek it out, right? That's part of the exciting part about this stage of life, is the responsibility is now on you. The responsibility you have to take in your own hands, and you have to decide what you want out of life. So for me, it's been intentionally seeking out that community, going to some of the parishes around here and just spending time with people, staying connected with the Shrine. We do have a Shenstadt professional men's group where we meet and talk about the different spiritual challenges in the day-to-day life. But that's almost exciting too. It's exciting to see that there's people out there who really need that. They really need someone to pursue them, and they're also looking for that community. So just trust that what you're feeling is something that other people are feeling too.
Yeah. But something that comes to mind with me around community, and I guess just like sanctifying work in general, is something that I've talked about with some past guests of the show, which is the idea of the cross is the means to the resurrection. And sometimes the cross shows up in certain places in our life and we want to run away from it because maybe we weren't expecting it exactly there, but where God is really calling us to love sacrificially, to take on the cross and to renew and sanctify the world through our own little deaths. And so when it comes to community, I think it can be hard sometimes when you come to a place where maybe there isn't that community built up, and I think a lot of people find that in their professional life.
Right.
And then there's
like an idea that like I need to just go find what's already there.
Yeah. But I think oftentimes what we really need at this moment in the church is we need people who are willing to sacrifice to build something.
Yeah.
And not to just sort of like go seeking something that already exists that makes you feel good, but to be willing to sacrifice a little bit to build up community. Because I think that sacrifice is what makes good community possible. And if people aren't willing to sacrifice, good community isn't going to happen.
I think that's the exciting part of where we are in the church right now, is there's so much opportunity for lay people to create ministries like that. There's so much opportunity for lay people to just build community and real authentic community, like the kind of community where you can go over to your friend's house and hang out with their kids. Like a lot of my friends now are getting married and having kids, and it's so wonderful that they open up their home to their friends, and just that's its own community. It doesn't have to be anything super formal. It doesn't have to be a group or a Bible study. It doesn't have to be. It can, but it can also be just as simple as calling someone on the phone and getting lunch with them once a week, or going to mass with one of your friends once a month even, or going to spend some time with your friends at their house. And that's where community really gets built. And I think that we tend to forget that because we think, I have to be doing something for it to be real community. But don't worry, if you spend the time with the right people, if you spend time getting to know those people, and you have prayer time together even, God will inspire you. God will work through that and bring something beautiful together.
Yeah. Speaking of the idea of the cross, what are maybe some of those crosses or struggles that you experienced transitioning into the professional life? And how did you handle that?
That's an intense question. I would say one could be, and this is me maybe because my temperament's different than other people, but the routine life is pretty tough. I really liked in college being able to move between classes and have free time in between, and get to have lunch whenever and read books in between class and stuff like that, and kind of drive my own schedule. And so it's been an adjustment to really make my life fit to the schedule of work, and that I'm sure is something that other people can relate to as well, but not for everybody. A lot of people do like the structure quite a bit. So every time I have to get up really early, I just really make sure in that moment that I really offer it to God, because in that way, I can be assured of the fact that God can take something of that sacrifice and make it useful spiritually to others. Another challenge has been, of course, just staying connected to my spiritual life in general. It's easy sometimes to just want to go home and go to bed after after work or after you finish your evening relaxation activities. So that's something. I think the other thing too is making really intentional leisure time. I think we're all cursed by this right here, smartphone, because with that you can kind of fill up all your leisure time with stuff that seems and feels really exciting in the moment. But then when you look back on it, you're like, wow, what have I just done with my life? I've scrolled through my Instagram feed for like 20 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour. Whoa. And I think it's really important too, like I said before, to then make time for intentional leisure, because that can be really fulfilling and rewarding, and it can also make you more excited about your work because you're working hard for that moment when you can have that good leisure time. Yeah. So I would say just intentionality has been a struggle, because you react to your schedule, that kind of thing. It's better to be more intentional for me now.
Yeah. I think sometimes, especially as American Catholics, we forget that honoring the Sabbath is one of the 10 Commandments. It's something that we're supposed to do, and that we actually need rest as people. And it's not necessarily virtuous to work 24/7 all the time or healthy. So.
Yeah, and it certainly feels virtuous though when you're doing it. It feels like you're doing something productive, and productivity is sometimes confused to be a virtue, when in reality it's not necessarily true. Our work has to be for something. It has to be completing some kind of task that really matters for our job and for what we're doing. So filling our time with busy work is not necessarily a virtue, although our society often treats it as though it is. Yeah. And the phone is really the easiest way to feel productive and to feel like we're working on something, or say like we're working on our social media image, or like we're working on, and sometimes we're reading through Twitter, we're looking through the news. I'm working on my political ideas, and I'm working on my intelligence by reading Twitter. And like, okay, sure, but also you could read a book.
Yeah. Well, just to that, I think one of the things that I really learned when I did a summer of missions at Camp Cove Crest with Life Team was we were really intentional about the Sabbath day, which was really necessary there, because like life is super intense during summer camp.
Sure.
And the thing I've also found is I've tried to bring that practice back home, is that when I'm really intentional about my rest time and honoring the Sabbath, then when I am supposed to work, I'm actually more productive. I'm more capable of doing the work and doing it well than when I don't rest, because then I'm kind of like half trying to rest and work at the same time.
Yeah.
So.
Absolutely. I think that it's one thing that, well, that I like this guy, Universal Man. I think I've seen a few of his videos. But one of the things that he talks about most is like, it's hard to really feel like you deserve your rest unless you like work hard at work. And then vice versa. It's hard to really work hard if you haven't had good, meaningful rest. And I think that that's a really great idea. Like, of course, we just work as hard and honestly as we possibly can, make sure we're actually getting stuff done, not looking busy. And then we really know when we're just looking busy, of course, in the back of our head. But it feels so good to be doing something that is leading towards something that is helping what your goals are at work. And then having that intentional leisure time just really fulfills you, and you can come to work just utterly at peace and ready to show up again. And they shouldn't serve one just the other. They should both live in harmony together. Like, I shouldn't just be having leisure time so I can work harder, and I shouldn't just be working really hard so I can justify like acting out really bad, like drinking a bunch when I get home or something like that. Yeah. They should be an interplay. It should be a harmonious kind of peaceful between the two. Yeah. And that's obviously a challenge. Like, I'm not sitting here like I'm an expert. It's just something that I'm working on right now.
I sometimes think of the Sabbath as kind of like God the Father's bedtime for us, right? Because like if you're like a parent with young children, you have to make sure that they go to bed on time and that they take care of themselves so they're not cranky and they can actually be like healthy and happy people. And that's how I think about like the idea of the Sabbath. Like the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath.
Yeah.
Is God telling us what we need in order to be healthy and happy human beings?
Yeah, there's like something exciting about a lot of that kind of stuff in the Ten Commandments or in what Christ has revealed to us about how we ought to live, that it actually makes our lives like better and with less like negative resistance to things, because it's how we're wired, right? Like God's revelation responds to how we're wired, and he wired us that way for a reason.
Yeah. Sometimes I think forget that God made us, and so he actually knows what we need and is going to make us happy. And sometimes we act as if that isn't true. But
definitely.
Anyway, there's another topic I'd like to discuss,
okay,
which is you talk about like in college working for the church, leading the Good Friday pilgrimage. So how do you find time to still work and volunteer and help build up the church as a young professional?
Yeah, that's a great question too. Again, I just want to always go back to this idea of intentionality, being intentional with your time, right? And being generous with your time too, especially in this regard. God gives us a lot of gifts and a lot of talents, especially as we're working, that we can sharpen more and more. Like I find that being in sales, I've been growing so much in confidence in who I am as a person and confidence in my ability to find and solve problems with people. And so like utilize your work skills to help inform your ministry. I think that's like when I had that click for me, that was like a revolutionary thing. Like, wow, like I could be reaching out to people and having conversations with them as though I were having a sales conversation. And that's a really curious idea for evangelization, right? Like I've had so many great conversations with my Protestant friends about what we share together, asking them questions, responding as they ask me questions, and that kind of dialogue can be really meaningful and fruitful. At the same time, also just looking for what you really want and like determining where opportunities lie. At the beginning of the year, we had noticed that there were a lot of people struggling with this idea of community, struggling to connect with one another face to face safely because of the pandemic. And we also had this wonderful chapel out here in West Austin, the Schoenstatt Shrine, and we thought, well, like, why don't we bring those two things together and have this outdoor event where everybody could wear a mask and be safe, but also really have a beautiful experience of retreat and formation. And so with a couple of us, we came together with this idea of the Bethlehem Summit, which became a 3-day long experience where a lot of people just got to experience community and family, which are gifts that the Schoenstatt community can offer to the church. But they also got to just deeply encounter the Blessed Mother and Christ here. And I just saw that as an opportunity. I got together a team to put it together, use some of my work wisdom maybe that I've gained to make that actually get off the ground, and it happened. And it's kind of wild to think in this stage of life, like we get the skills and continue to build on those skills to make stuff like that happen, because we have the professional kind of background for it. We have experience doing stuff like that, putting together events, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, I guess maybe before we wrap up here, are there any final thoughts or advice you have for people?
I think I would just summarize to say, like, be intentional about your life. Be intentional about how you spend your time, your leisure time in particular, but also your time at work. Be intentional about how you dream. Think about where you want to be 6 months from now, where you want to be 2 years from now, that kind of thing, what those goals are. And then set strategies in place that really excite you and really motivate you. Think about those things that you couldn't live without if you don't accomplish them after 6 months or 2 years or 5 years. Because then you're going to be motivated to make those strategies right then and there. And once you make those strategies, they become so much easier to act upon because you have a plan, you have something in place for that. So I would say that just be really intentional with your time. Remember that Christ is calling you to something in your life, and don't be afraid to dream about what that is, especially now that it's maybe closer to you in this stage of life.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Glad to be here. Thank you, Alex.